Good morning and welcome back to Impact on a Tuesday morning, the day after we were smothered in smoke. My guest is Brandon Cooper. Brandon, I got to admit that I kind of had a weird reaction to it yesterday. It kind of surprised me, to be honest. I left work and my gut just went, whoa. And did you have a similar reaction at all?
I personally didn't have too much of a reaction, but my girls definitely were asking some questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, we've had the talk coming back to school at the beginning of the year, there was that talk, and then a couple months later there was that talk, and then again when you start hearing about the fires in BC, that talk happens again. So
yeah, both my wife and I had this need to go, compulsion really, to go fill up our tank with gas, or fill up my car with, what do I say sometimes? I'm going to gas up my car with fill. Anyway, I felt better after the gas tank was full. Welcome. Brandon Cooper is a partner of United Way. He's been working with us on the 100 Faces of United Way project. He owns a company called Realpics, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the 100 Faces campaign, but not only that, we'll talk about some other things that you've been doing and that you do personally, because I think it's really interesting to talk about what you and your family do in terms of going and helping other people in other parts of the world as well. But let's start at the beginning. Who is Brandon Cooper, and how did you come to Fort McMurray?
Oh, let me think here. Long story short, I was managing Earls in Banff, and they sent me up here to work here for, I think it was supposed to be three and a half weeks, to help sort of bridge the gap while they put a new ownership group in place and do a renovation. So I was supposed to be here for 3 weeks to a month, and that was 14 years ago.
That long?
Coming up this fall here.
And you didn't start out doing what you are doing now. What did you start out doing after you were finished at Earls?
Well, when they shut down for the renovation, I got an opportunity to take my real estate course, which I'd always wanted to do. Got licensed as a realtor and did that full time until, well, I'm actually technically still licensed. I keep that more so just to gain access to properties to service the Realpics side of the business. Yeah. But yeah, I went into real estate after that.
And at some point, you must have made a transition to doing people photography, and which is why we got connected for the 100 Faces project. How did that jump happen, and was it a little, as an artist, who you've become prolific in the market in terms of your real estate photography, but making the jump to people, that's not an insignificant jump. How did you do that?
It was terrifying, to be honest with you. What would it have been, I guess, last fall? Krista from YMM approached me with this idea of doing this 50 under 50 list in Fort McMurray, where they'd kind of celebrate some of the movers and shakers in town. And she wanted to profile each person with a portrait and then also sort of a video interview to go along with that. So I had done some work with YMM previous to that, just little jobs here and there helping out. So she said, hey, would you be interested? And my first thought was not a chance. Because honestly, up to that point, I think I had done 3 headshots, and it was just for realtors who needed some help. So I thought, what the heck, let's give it a go. It was kind of a low pressure in the sense that it wasn't a huge corporate job that I had, I really had to commit to, I had to commit the time, but it wasn't so much pressure on the creative side. So I said, hey, it's a cool experience. I remember hearing from a photographer back in the day. He told me his one piece of advice was just he would have never said no when he was younger. But he said no so many times because he was intimidated. So I kind of took that advice a little bit and just said, hey, what's the worst that can happen? Let's give it a go. And it actually turned out to be really a cool project. Met a ton of people, learned a lot, not only from them, but also on the creative side, doing the portraits. Gained some confidence on that, and that was sort of the kickstart to doing people photography.
When you look back on that project, the top 50 under 50 with YMM magazine, you have to feel a sense of pride because they're beautiful portraits.
I do. I'm actually quite pleased with how they were. I don't like to admit it to people, but if you could see behind the scenes when that whole thing was going on, I was a basket case at times. There was moments where we had people come in and it would go perfectly well, and some people just very photogenic and comfortable in front of the camera, and that made me comfortable, and we'd do the shot, high five, and be on our way. Then there'd be some folks that came in and just did not want their photo taken. And then it became my job to kind of try to loosen them up, which was difficult because I was a little uptight myself. So that whole process was interesting too. But at the end of the day, looking back, Yeah, seeing that magazine, I'm really pleased with a lot of the photos. Got some phenomenal feedback from the people. So yeah, I think it was really good.
So you went from 50, and then I give you a call at some point to say, how do you feel about 100? Because we had this idea, and really it was an idea that came out of our executive director, Cecilia Much, early on when she was just getting started in United Way. She had this idea of what if we featured 100 people connected to United Way? And then we put that through Krista, who sits on our board as our communications chair, and she immediately suggested yourself, Brandon. And was it a little frightening to hear from me asking about 100?
It was. My first thought was I don't even know 100 people. I didn't know if I was responsible for putting that together, if I was going to be just doing the photos. So right out of the gate, a million things went running through my mind. But, at first, like I said, it was very intimidating. And if I remember correctly, you reached out to me, I think it was April, which is the busiest season for me in real estate. March, April, May kind of thing is crazy. So here I was sort of treading water as it was. An opportunity like this comes up, and I don't want to say no. I want to be a part of it. At the same time, I don't want to commit to something that I know I can't deliver on time-wise. But at first it was intimidating, but I'm so thankful that I agreed to do it and that we went through the whole process, because sitting here now, it was amazing.
So for people listening, the way we approached it, we needed to identify, and so 100 people, and so we put the call out asking for volunteers. And so these were people that are United Way donors, United Way volunteers, people that volunteer at workplace campaigns out at site, and they're people as well that work in agencies and people who receive benefit from agencies. It was a wide mix of people. And we targeted, I think they were Saturdays mostly, and we would set up at the Red Pole Center, and we would sort of schedule people every 15 minutes at first. It became every 10 minutes eventually, and people just came, and it was this rotation of people coming and going, and we did a little video shoot with most of them, not all of them, and then a photo, a portrait session. And what was fascinating to me, Brandon, was you seemed to have a sense of when you got the shot you needed. Is that true?
I think so. It's hard to explain, but when you look at somebody and or in a photo and you're like, oh, that's so them, that's so Russell, or that's so and so. There's just that look that when you don't know somebody and you're trying to take their portrait, it's hard to figure that out. So you got to spend a bit of time together. But I think going through the 50 under 50 and then doing this project, kind of got a decent idea of how to pick that out. And again, going back to 50 under 50, it was difficult at times because some people get really uncomfortable. But even in their discomfort, you can sometimes recognize sort of what personality is just under the surface. And so if you can pull that out quickly, you're good to go. And I think, looking back even at this project too, there's a couple, I'll be honest, but there's very few that I look at and I don't feel like we kind of captured them. And before we were you and I talked about it. We were fairly careful that before we let them leave the room, we check with them. I don't like normally showing people their headshots because they're always their biggest critics, and they pick apart maybe their hair's out of place as opposed to how nice they look and how well they're lit, all those kinds of things, right? So you don't like to get them too involved. But for the most part, it was take the shot, show them the camera and say, hey, does that feel like you? And if they said yeah, we were cool with it. And if not, we shot until they were happy. And very, very few people, I don't think anyone left the room not comfortable with their shot. So we learned quickly through that process.
The other thing that we did was you'd be on camera and I would be off camera asking questions of most of the people to really get at the root of their story. And when you think about that, were there several moments that you recall that where your heart just went, oh, wow. Anything jumps out?
Oh,
without being specific.
Yeah, no, there was a handful that, many times going home and talking to my wife and telling her the story. A couple fire moments, and actually indirectly, some of the people that weren't even necessarily on camera, but they were there with somebody who was on camera, and we get talking. And then some of the stories of how people, the different agencies and how they were affected by those agencies, maybe if it was recovery or who knows what it was. There was a few where it was hard. It was hard to keep it together a couple times.
Yeah. Just
standing behind the camera, and again, looking back at that, those are the ones that I think of to this day, and I don't think I'll ever forget them.
I think of the three young boys, young men, whose lives essentially were saved by stepping stones.
When you hear a 15-year-old kid say that he wouldn't be here today,
Yeah.
that hits home.
Yeah. Or James Joseph, who was at Pasture Place.
Yeah.
And we asked him something to the effect of, describe why Pasture Place is important to you, and he just was speechless. He couldn't find the words, and it was so powerful.
Yeah. And that one stood out to me too, because here's this hulk of a man comes in, shakes your hand. He's just a massive guy, and to see him just instantly kind of become so vulnerable. Like I said, I sat there and I was just kind of beside myself, speechless myself.
The 100 Faces campaign was launched last week on Wednesday, and each day at 7 in the morning, if you're up that early, we feature a new person. We're going to do that for 100 days in a row, leading into campaign and right up until the end of campaign. And I think it's fair to say that every face tells a story. And part of your role, Brandon, was to capture that image. And I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of stories there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Brandon Cooper is my guest with Realpics. He is the photographer behind the 100 Faces of United Way campaign, which is running now on our various social media channels, celebrating the many people that make up the United Way, both as people that contribute to United Way and get benefit from United Way funded agencies. You're listening to Impact right here on 91.1 The Bridge. And good morning, welcome back to the show. A quick reminder that if you ever want to go back and watch and or listen to previous episodes, there's a lot of great stories and information about our community embedded in both the podcasts and in the television footage that Shaw TV does for us on their YouTube channel. A great resource for the community, so I invite you to check that out. My guest today is Brandon Cooper from Realpics. Brandon is the photographer and videographer behind the 100 Faces of United Way project. He also was the photographer of the amazing Top 50 Under 50 issue of YMM magazine that caused, I think that was probably one of the most talked about issues that Krista and her team have done with YMM.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah,
probably that and the fire editions.
It was really quite remarkable, and Brandon really had a big task in front of him, trying to capture the great portraits of 100 people that are connected to United Way, and these are people that they're donors, they're volunteers, they're people that work at workplaces raising money for the campaign. They're agency people. We have 31 amazing agencies that we fund through the United Way, and they're people that have been helped significantly by United Way funded agencies, and it's been an amazing process, and we're now at the point of sharing those things on our social media sites. And the one thing we did, Brandon, and I think you and I had our brains were working in the same line as we were filming, it just lent itself to a little blooper video as we were going along, because part of the process was we'd have people, to make sure the microphone was working, they'd say test, or test, test, or test. Diana Moser, test, test, test. Yeah. And we got a 15-year-old volunteer to take that footage and turn it into a little blue. That turned out pretty cool, that little blooper reel.
Yeah, it sure did, and it was fun to watch it back, because I had nothing to do with the video.
Yeah.
But I remembered the situation when it was filmed. And in our head, I remember joking with you as we were because it was shot over, what was it, three months? 3 months,
yeah.
Different weekends. It was do a bunch, then you'd have 2 weeks off of nothing and go back and do the exact same thing. And so you'd get all these different people coming in, and I remember doing those interviews and seeing the different tests, and we're thinking, oh man, there's a great video here. And then having Ben come in and take that on with virtually no guidance, just full creative control, say, here, see what you can do with this. Came up with a really cool video, actually so much so that he and I have been in talks since then to work together more on some more video projects in the future. So
the talent of young people just never ceases to amaze me. They just seem to have a connection to the technology that an older guy like me just does not have. So
it's true.
Totally in awe. As we went through the process, What did you learn about the community that you didn't know before?
Oof. There's a lot of need. I think I knew it, from a high level, but you don't really realize. First of all, I didn't know enough about United Way. I didn't realize what it did with the different agencies and all that kind of thing. And so there's the obvious places around town where you drive and you know that there's need. But after doing this project, I realized there's a lot of stuff that you don't see, that you don't know exists. And everybody needs help. There's no, I don't know how you put it, but there's the need is amazing from different age groups, different ethnic backgrounds. There's just need everywhere. And for a city that's got a stigma of, money this, money that, we're no different than anywhere else. We've got people, we all have needs and we need help.
I don't know about you, but I felt a sense of, I don't know if honor or humbleness is the right word, being in the presence of probably 6 to 8 people that were part of this process who shared things that were deeply personal. And there was the one lady who was struggling with a heroin addiction most of her life, and who is now giving back and helping others.
Yep.
It was just humbling, I think, is the only word that comes to mind.
I found it inspiring because when you hear her story, you the amount of despair and hopelessness that she had, and so ready to give up, for her to be able to overcome it, and then also turn around and be able to help people who were feeling the same way. Like I said, inspiring is the only thing I can think of, because I just can't imagine being in that position. Yeah. And then to see too the happiness she has now and the joy that she shows, like she's pretty, you can tell that that's somebody who doesn't sweat the small things anymore. You know what I mean? She's got perspective.
Yeah, and we saw that in the young gentleman as well. The 3 guys, Michael and Bradley and Brandon. God, I'm getting good at remembering all the names, because I had to go through all the names many times. The other thing that struck me as I've began to know some of the agency people more deeply is their level of commitment and love for what they do. Did you pick that up in that shot?
Absolutely. I felt like after the first few, I could tell instantly whether this was a person who has used the services of the United Way or in the agencies of the United Way, or if this is someone who works for the agencies. There's no mistaking them. And they don't do it for the money, they don't do it for the glory. It's just like built into them. It's very obvious and very apparent. So yeah, I noticed that big time. Not
to single anybody out, but I will. Amanda Oak, who works with Blue Heron Sports Services. Amanda wasn't in the community on the day of the fire, and she told this story here on the show. She was in Edmonton at at a conference or something, and so she began working the phones to make sure that her clients were getting out safely and all that. Well, she had one client that was left behind in an apartment, and she was working the phone literally for hours trying to get help to this individual who was not terribly mentally stable considering the situation, and at one point was somewhat suicidal. His life was saved because she took the care and attention to not let go and not give up. And trying to get emergency services in that craziness was not an easy task. So that's just one example for me that jumps out. I'm sure there's so many. Well, and that's exactly it. When I think back and really when I go through the files and I look at the faces, every single story comes back. Yeah. That's what was so kind of amazing. It's like a crash course, 3 months of sort of intense getting to meet people. I've been here, like I said, almost 14 years, and I've met more people in the last 12 months than I have in those first, 13 years. Well, our hope is that people that see these images and hear the stories and see the video that we're still yet to produce, because we're going to be producing a video from a lot of that video footage that we'll release early in September, that you can connect more deeply with what United Way is all about. And really what has come out of it is the idea that we are United Way, and that United Way is all of us. It's all of us at some level or another. My guest this morning is Brandon Cooper with Realpics. He is a photographer in the community and has been a tremendous contributor to our 100 Faces of United Way project, which is ongoing right now. You're listening to Impact. It is a team effort. We do not do this alone. United Way, Fuse Social, Shaw TV, Fort McMurray, and our friends here at 91.1 The Bridge. Welcome back to the 91.1 The Bridge Studios in Composite High School, under a massive renovation right now. I can't imagine how they're going to have everything ready for the start of the school year, but it's a flurry of activity over here. My guest this morning is Brandon Cooper. Brandon is with Realpics. He is a professional photographer in the community. Really, he's one of the, probably the most prolific real estate photographer, but with two community projects, the YMM Top 50 Under 50 and now the 100 Faces of United Way project. You've shown a skill in capturing humans in a way that really is quite beautiful, and we encourage people to watch that as we go along. And you've learned a lot about the community and the process as well. But I know that in our private conversations that you and your wife Jody really are interested in being forces for good in the world, and as a family you take the opportunity to go and travel and help out in other parts of the world. Talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we help out wherever we can, but we do have one sort of group or charity that's really close to our hearts over in Los Cabos, Mexico. It's called Feeding Los Cabos Kids. And actually Rick from the Bridge has been a part of that as well recently, and I don't know, I'm probably going to mess up my numbers here, but bottom line, I think there's 11 kitchens in the region basically feeding the kids. That's literally what it is, because the idea behind it is that the kids can't do anything until they wake up and have some breakfast. So they serve between 10,000 and 11,000 meals per month through those 11 kitchens, and yeah, we do whatever we can. We've helped them with their branding, any kind of financial support we can, and then making trips down there and physically working the kitchens. Actually, we got married down in Los Cabos 3 years ago, and took our wedding group to one of the kitchens for a day, and went and picked up all the food and served the meal. Cooked everything and everything like that. So the folks that came to the wedding, it was one of those things. We had 25 people at the wedding, and we just said, hey, we're doing this trip. This is what's happening. Who's in? We'll get some vans and we'll go. And pretty much everybody joined us. And there was a few local folks here from Fort McMurray that came, and it was one of those things where they came home fired up and excited about it, and it was a huge help for Feeding Los Cabos Kids, and things are just getting busier and busier. Talk about, if you can, the impact on those folks that participated in that. Did they have a significant perspective shift going through that experience? Yeah, I think so. There was, I don't know if I should mention names, but there was one gentleman there, good friend of mine, who I don't know to that point what his experience was with any kind of other charities. But when it was all said and done, I mean, every single person there had tears in their eyes, because when you're leaving those kids, you see them, you got to say goodbye, and we've built relationships with some of them. A couple of them we support sort of full time, just from a financial perspective. But I remember when we were leaving, this guy was just, big tough guy, just tears in his eyes, and he was just handing me his credit card. He's like, what can we do? He wanted to go and buy 100 pairs of shoes if he could. But, down there you got to be a little bit careful on how you distribute things. It's got to be a bit organized and all that kind of stuff. But bottom line, he came home, he shared about it, and we've been able to sort of generate support from other folks around town for that as well. So, one of the sayings that I really appreciate is there is a great gift in the giving. Do you agree with that in terms of your experience? No,
and
absolutely.
What have you gotten from that experience personally?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one for me, because I don't like, you go and you do nice things like that and it makes you feel good. But then all of a sudden you can turn around and feel like you're being sort of selfish, because there's that one little bit of you inside that says, well, I'm getting satisfaction from this. Is that okay? And at the end of the day, when you go down and you meet these kids and you start to build a relationship with them and their parents, and then you go down a year later and you see the same family and some of the challenges that they faced, you become instantly invested. It's like your own children. So since the last trip, actually, the funniest thing, the one little girl that we are closest to and that we basically, like I said, we support financially for school and stuff like that, her mom now has a cell phone. So we get little good night texts, once in a while before bed. My wife will get a little, it's her, because it's like ding, 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 ding. There's like 6 texts, all little emojis saying good night, love you. So, at the end of the day, yes, I agree with that saying. We just can't not do it.
Yeah. Something you'll continue?
100%. But and that's the thing, we want to ramp it up as much as we can. It's challenging because it's not a registered Canadian charity, so we can't provide receipts, and so that limits the amount of sort of financial, we just kind of give out of our pocket, because we know the people, and we know it will help, but it's tough to get that bigger support.
Yeah.
So we're working towards maybe one day being able to register it somehow so that we can leverage support from around here.
Well, it's great what you're doing, and thank you so much on behalf of United Way, the work that you've done on our campaign, and I know that we've somewhat paid you for it, but a lot of it is gift in kind, and we could not have done it without your generosity, the amount of time that you invested into the 100 Faces campaign. So thank you.
Well, thank you for calling me. It was an experience of a lifetime.
My guest this morning, Brandon Cooper, who is the photographer, the artist behind the 100 Faces of United Way campaign that's on right now, and for the next 90 some days, I've lost count. I think we're day 6 or something. So we're doing this for 100 days in a row, and it's been just a delight. You've been listening to Impact. It is a team effort of United Way, Fuse Social, Shaw TV, Fort McMurray, who film us and then share it on Shaw Cable 10 and on our YouTube channel, and of course our friends right here at 91.1 The Bridge.